The lipstick wasn't Julia's shade. I knew this because I'd been married to the woman for 18 years, and in all that time, she'd never worn anything bolder than dusty rose or subtle peach. This was fire engine red, the kind of color that screamed for attention in boardrooms and hotel bars. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I held the coffee cup up to the kitchen light, studying the perfect crescent moon of crimson on the rim. Julia was upstairs, allegedly taking a shower after another late night at the office. The water had been running for 23 minutes. I'd been counting. "Dad, you're being weird again." Emma, my 16-year-old daughter, grabbed an apple from the counter and shot me one of those looks that teenagers had perfected since the dawn of time. Half pity, half annoyance, all judgment. "Just admiring your mother's new lipstick choice," I said, setting the cup down with deliberate care. Very bold, very unlike her. Emma's expression shifted slightly. Something flickered behind her eyes. Knowledge, maybe? Guilt? She took a bite of her apple and mumbled around it. Maybe she's trying something new. Maybe she is. The shower stopped. Julia's voice drifted down from upstairs, singing something I didn't recognize. She'd been doing that a lot lately, humming tunes that weren't from our shared playlist, wearing perfume I'd never bought her, coming home with stories about coworkers I'd never heard of before. Greg Sloane had been mentioned frequently in recent weeks. Her new boss, apparently. A real go-getter, great leadership skills, excellent at team-building exercises. I'd met Greg exactly once, at the company Christmas party 3 months ago. Tall, confident, with the kind of smile that belonged in toothpaste commercials. He'd shaken my hand with just a little too much firmness and called me buddy twice in the span of 30 seconds. Julia had laughed at all his jokes, even the ones that weren't funny. Especially the ones that weren't funny. "I'm going to school," Emma announced, shouldering her backpack. She paused at the kitchen door, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Dad? Maybe don't go looking for things you don't want to find." The front door slammed behind her before I could ask what she meant. Julia appeared in the doorway moments later, wrapped in her terry cloth robe, hair still damp from the shower. She looked beautiful. She always looked beautiful. But there was something different about her lately. A glow that hadn't been there for years. The kind of glow that came from secrets. "Morning, honey," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I might be late again tonight. Big presentation tomorrow, and Greg wants the whole team to stay and prep." "Greg again?" I said, keeping my voice neutral. "He's really putting you through your paces." "He's thorough," Julia replied, and there was something in the way she said it that made my stomach clench. "That's why he's so successful." She moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, grabbing her travel mug, her keys, her phone. Always her phone. She'd started taking it everywhere, even to the bathroom. When I jokingly mentioned it last week, she'd laughed it off. "Work emergency might come up," she'd said. "What kind of work emergency happened at midnight? Or 2 a.m.? Or during our daughter's school play last Tuesday? Alex?" Julia was looking at me now, and I realized I'd been staring. "You okay? You seem distracted." "Just thinking about work stuff," I lied. "You know how it is." She nodded, but her attention was already elsewhere. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at it with the kind of smile I used to inspire. Quick, secretive, warm. "I have to run," she said, pecking me on the cheek with lips that tasted like mint toothpaste and lies. "Love you." "Love you too," I said to the empty kitchen. I waited until I heard her car pull out of the driveway before I picked up the coffee cup again. The lipstick stains seemed to mock me, a scarlet letter spelling out truths I wasn't ready to face. But Emma's words echoed in my head. Maybe don't go looking for things you don't want to find. The problem was, I'd already found them. The late nights, the new clothes, The way she said Greg's name like it tasted like chocolate. The distance that had grown between us, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. I'd spent 18 years being Alex Dorsey, devoted husband and father, technical writer, suburban dad who mowed his lawn on Saturdays and grilled burgers on Sundays. I'd been comfortable in that role, secure in the knowledge that Julia and Emma were my world, and I was theirs. But what happened when your world shifted on its axis? When the woman you'd built your life around started building a new life that didn't include you? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Pete's number. Pete Kowalski had been my best friend since college, a guy who'd never married because he claimed he'd seen too much from behind the bar. He worked at Murphy's Pub downtown, dispensing wisdom and whiskey in equal measure to anyone who needed it. Dorsey. Pete's voice was gravelly with sleep and last night's cigarettes. It's not even 9 a.m. Someone better be dead. I think my marriage might be. There was a pause, followed by the sound of Pete sitting up in bed. Shit, man. What happened? Julia's having an affair. Saying it out loud made it real in a way that thinking it hadn't. The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and impossible to ignore. You sure? Pete asked, and I could hear him moving around, probably reaching for his cigarettes. I mean, dead sure? Because that's not something you can take back once you say it. Red lipstick on her coffee cup. She doesn't wear red lipstick. New clothes, new perfume, new schedule. She's working late every night with her boss, and she smiles when she talks about him. Okay, Pete said slowly. That's circumstantial. Could be innocent. She took a 23-minute shower this morning and came out glowing like she'd just won the lottery. When's the last time a shower made you glow, Pete? Point taken. So what are you going to do about it? That was the question, wasn't it? What did you do when you discovered that the person you loved most in the world had decided you weren't enough anymore? When 18 years of marriage and 16 years of parenthood suddenly felt like a rough draft of someone else's life? I don't know, I admitted. I've never been cheated on before. Is there a handbook? Yeah, it's called Jack Daniels, and it's not very helpful, Pete said. Look, why don't you come by the bar tonight? We'll talk it through. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe there's an explanation. And maybe I'm the biggest fool in Boston. Even if you are, you're still my friend. Murphy's, 8 o'clock. I'll keep the good stuff behind the bar. After Pete hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at that coffee cup. Julia had left it on the counter like it was nothing, like it was just another piece of morning debris to be cleaned up and forgotten. But it wasn't nothing. It was evidence. Proof that my wife was becoming someone I didn't recognize, someone who wore bold lipstick and took long showers and smiled at text messages from men who weren't me. I picked up the cup and walked to the sink. For a moment, I hesitated. Washing it would destroy the evidence, erase the scarlet proof of my suspicions. But keeping it felt pathetic, like I was clinging to my own humiliation. In the end, I put it in the dishwasher. Some stains, I was beginning to learn, couldn't be washed away no matter how hard you scrubbed. Murphy's Pub looked exactly like what it was, a dive bar that had given up pretending to be anything else. The neon sign flickered intermittently, casting red and blue shadows on the cracked sidewalk. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of fried food, stale beer, and broken dreams. Pete was behind the bar, polishing glasses with the kind of methodical precision that came from 20 years of practice. He looked up when I walked in, taking in my rumpled shirt and the expression on my face. "You look like hell," he said, by way of greeting. "Feel worse." I slid onto a bar stool and gestured vaguely at the bottles lined up behind him. "Something strong." Pete poured 2 fingers of bourbon and set it in front of me. "Okay, talk. What happened since this morning?" I took a sip of the bourbon and felt it burn its way down my throat. "I did some digging." Jesus, Alex. I told you to come here and talk, not go full private investigator. It wasn't hard, I said, pulling out my phone. Julia left her laptop open when she rushed out this morning. Her email was right there on the screen. Pete winced. Please tell me you didn't read her emails. I didn't have to read them. The subject lines were enough. I scrolled through the screenshots I'd taken, my hands shaking slightly. Last night was amazing. Can't wait for our weekend getaway. My husband suspects nothing. Fuck. Pete poured himself a shot and downed it in one gulp. I'm sorry, man. I was hoping you were wrong. Yeah, well, so was I. I showed him another screenshot. This one's my personal favorite. Greg, you make me feel alive again. I forgot what that was like. The words stung just as much the second time around. Maybe more, because now I was sharing my humiliation with someone else. Pete read over the messages, his expression growing darker with each one. How long? He asked. Based on the timestamps? About 3 months. Started right around the time she got promoted and Greg became her boss. Classy, Pete muttered. Nothing like a good old-fashioned workplace affair to spice up the quarterly reports. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. The best part is, she's been telling me how much she loves her new job, how fulfilling it is, how Greg really understands her potential. I bet he does. A group of college kids burst through the door, loud and drunk and oblivious to the domestic tragedy unfolding at the bar. Pete served them with professional efficiency while I nursed my bourbon and tried to figure out what came next. So what's your plan? Pete asked when the kids had migrated to the pool table in the back. I don't have one. That's the problem. I stared into my glass like it might contain answers along with the alcohol. I keep thinking I should confront her, but then what? She denies it? Admits it? Either way, my marriage is over. Maybe it's been over for a while and you're just now noticing. The truth of that hit harder than the bourbon. When was the last time Julia and I had really talked? Not about Emma's grades or the mortgage payment or whose turn it was to take out the trash, but actually talked? When was the last time we'd made love instead of just having perfunctory married couple sex? When was the last time she'd looked at me the way she looked at her phone when Greg texted? There's something else, I said, pulling up another screenshot. They're not just having an affair. They're making plans. Big plans. Pete leaned in to read the message on my screen. His eyebrows shot up. They're talking about leaving their spouses? Julia wants to wait until after Emma graduates. She doesn't want to disrupt her senior year. How thoughtful of her to consider our daughter's feelings while she's busy destroying our family. What about Greg? He married? Valerie Sloane. I looked her up on Facebook. Beautiful woman, works in finance, drives a BMW. They've got a nice house in Newton. No kids. I took another sip of bourbon. I wonder if she knows her husband is planning to trade her in for a newer model. Pete was quiet for a long moment, wiping down the bar with unnecessary thoroughness. Finally, he looked up at me. You know what you need to do, right? Drink myself into oblivion? Tell Valerie Sloane what her husband's up to. The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. I can't do that. Why not? Because that would make it real. Once I tell someone else's wife that her husband is cheating, there's no going back. No pretending I misunderstood those emails or that Julia's working late for legitimate reasons. Alex, buddy, you're already past the point of no return. Your wife is planning to leave you for another man. The only question now is whether you're going to let her blindside you completely or if you're going to take some control of the situation. I knew he was right, but knowing something and accepting it were two different things. For 18 years, I'd been half of Alex and Julia. I'd defined myself in relation to her, built my identity around being her husband and Emma's father. Without that, who was I? Besides, Pete continued, this Valerie woman deserves to know. If someone was planning to destroy your life, wouldn't you want a heads up? I suppose. And think about it strategically. Right now, you're alone in this. Julia and Greg have each other. But if you team up with Valerie, what? We form some kind of revenge squad? Why not? She's got just as much reason to be pissed as you do. Maybe more, if she doesn't see it coming. I considered this, turning it over in my mind like a puzzle piece that might or might not fit. The idea of confronting Valerie Sloane terrified me, but it also appealed to something dark and angry that was growing in my chest. How would I even approach her? I asked. Hi, stranger, your husband is sleeping with my wife? You'll figure it out. You're a writer, aren't you? Writers are supposed to be good with words. I write technical manuals for software companies. That's not exactly the same thing. Words are words. Besides, you don't need to be Shakespeare. You just need to be honest. I finished my bourbon and signaled for another. The alcohol was starting to work its magic, blunting the sharp edges of my pain and replacing them with something that felt almost like determination. What if she doesn't believe me? Then you show her the same evidence you showed me. Hard to argue with email screenshots. What if she already knows? Then you'll have found yourself an ally who's been waiting for someone else to make the first move. The college kids at the pool table erupted in cheers as someone sank the 8-ball. Their joy felt obscene in the context of my crumbling life, but it also reminded me that the world would keep turning regardless of my personal drama. People would keep laughing and celebrating and falling in love while my marriage disintegrated. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. I need to think about this, I said finally. Don't think too long. Every day you wait is another day they get to plan your destruction without consequences. Pete's words followed me home that night, echoing in my head as I pulled into my driveway. Julia's car was already there, which meant she'd actually come home at a reasonable hour for once. I could see her silhouette in the living room window, probably watching TV or reading one of those romance novels she'd started buying lately. The irony wasn't lost on me. I sat in my car for a few minutes, staring at my house, our house, and trying to imagine what it would look like, empty. Would Julia take Emma with her when she left? Would I be alone in these rooms that had once been filled with laughter and family dinners and Christmas mornings? My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. When can we do it again? It took me a moment to realize what had happened. Julia must have accidentally forwarded the message to me instead of responding to it. I stared at the screen, reading those words over and over until they burned themselves into my retinas. As I watched, another message appeared. Sorry, wrong number. Please delete. But it was too late. I'd seen it, and more importantly, I'd felt it. The casual cruelty of those words, the evidence of intimacy that should have been mine, the confirmation that my worst fears were absolutely, undeniably true. I screenshot the messages and added them to my growing collection of evidence. Then I looked up Valerie Sloane's contact information and started composing a message I never thought I'd have to write. Valerie Sloane agreed to meet me at a coffee shop in downtown Boston, neutral territory, where neither of us would have to worry about running into mutual acquaintances. I'd been expecting someone brittle and suspicious, but the woman who walked through the door of Cafe Luna looked more curious than cautious. She was beautiful in an understated way, with dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail and the kind of effortless style that probably cost more than my monthly salary. When she spotted me at a corner table, she approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations. Alex Dorsey? She extended a manicured hand. Valerie Sloane. Thank you for reaching out, though I have to admit your message was rather cryptic. I'd agonized over that message for hours, writing and rewriting it until the words lost all meaning. In the end, I'd settled for simple. We need to talk about our spouses. It's important. I wasn't sure how much to say over text, I admitted, gesturing for her to sit. Can I get you something to drink? Coffee black. She settled into the chair across from me, studying my face with the kind of intensity that made me understand why she was successful in finance. So, what's this about? Your message mentioned Julia and Greg. There was no easy way to say it, so I decided to just rip the bandage off. Your husband is having an affair with my wife. Valerie's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. A tightening around the corners, a barely perceptible straightening of her shoulders. That's quite an accusation. I have proof. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots I'd collected over the past few days. The emails, the text messages, the calendar entries for business trips that coincided with Julia's mysterious weekend absences. Valerie read through them methodically, her face revealing nothing. "How long have you known?" she asked finally. "I started suspecting about a week ago, confirmed it 3 days ago. You?" A bitter smile played at the corners of her mouth. "I've suspected for months. Greg's been different lately, more attentive in some ways, more distant in others. He bought me expensive jewelry for no reason, which is usually a sign of guilt. And he's been working late more often than usual. But you didn't have proof?" "Nothing concrete. Greg's always been careful about his affairs." The casual way she said affairs hit me like a slap. "This has happened before?" "Oh, honey." Valerie's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Greg's been cheating on me for years, usually with younger women from his gym or his golf club. This is the first time he's gotten involved with someone married, someone with as much to lose as he does." I felt naive and stupid, like I'd been playing checkers while everyone else was playing chess. "Why didn't you leave him?" "Because Greg is very good at making his indiscretions disappear before they become problems, and because I've been building my own exit strategy for the past 2 years. She leaned back in her chair, studying me with renewed interest. "But this situation with your wife, this is different. This time he's talking about leaving me. Julia wants to wait until Emma graduates." How considerate of her. Valerie's tone could have frozen coffee. "Greg mentioned that timeline to me last week, actually. He said he was thinking about making some life changes after next spring. I assume he meant trading me in for a newer model." The waitress brought Valerie's coffee, and she wrapped her hands around the mug like she was trying to absorb its warmth. For the first time since she'd sat down, she looked vulnerable. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I know this isn't easy to hear. Actually, it's a relief. I've been waiting for the other shoe to drop for months. Now I know what I'm dealing with." She took a sip of her coffee and seemed to regain her composure. "The question is, what do we do about it? I was hoping you might have some ideas." "Oh, I have plenty of ideas. The question is how far you're willing to go." Something in her tone made me nervous. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Greg and Julia think they're so clever, planning their little love nest while keeping their spouses in the dark. They think they hold all the cards because they have each other, and we have nothing." Valerie's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "But they're wrong. We have each other now, and we have something they don't." "Which is?" "The element of surprise. They have no idea we know about their affair, which means they have no idea what's coming." I was beginning to understand why Valerie was successful in finance. She had the kind of calculating intelligence that could spot weaknesses and exploit them without hesitation. It was exactly what I needed, and exactly what terrified me. "What did you have in mind?" "First, we gather more evidence. Everything we can find. Financial records, hotel receipts, phone records, social media posts. We document every lie they've told and every dollar they've spent on their affair." "And then?" "Then we destroy them, professionally, socially, financially. We make sure that when their relationship inevitably crashes and burns, they have nothing left to fall back on." The venom in her voice was startling, but I found myself nodding along. After days of feeling helpless and humiliated, the prospect of taking action was intoxicating. "How do we start?" Valerie pulled out her phone and opened a note-taking app. Greg has a company credit card that he uses for business expenses. I have access to the statements because I handle our household finances. I'll bet you anything he's been using it to pay for hotel rooms and expensive dinners. Julia's been buying new clothes and getting her hair done more often. She told me she got a raise, but now I'm wondering if Greg's been giving her money. We'll find out. What about their communication? Are they using their work emails or personal accounts? Both, from what I can tell. Julia's been sloppy about logging out of her accounts. Good. We'll monitor everything. And I want to know their schedules, where they're meeting, what they're planning. Knowledge is power, Alex. The more we know about their affair, the more effectively we can end it. I should have been disturbed by the ruthless efficiency with which Valerie was planning our spouse's destruction. Instead, I felt energized for the first time in days. After being a passive victim of Julia's deception, I was finally going to be an active participant in my own life. There's something else, Valerie said, leaning forward conspiratorially. Greg's up for a major promotion at work. Partner track, 7-figure salary, the works. But the firm has a strict morality clause. If they found out he was having an affair with a subordinate, he'd lose the promotion? He'd lose his job. The firm can't afford that kind of liability, especially not in the current climate. Sexual harassment lawsuits are expensive, and Greg's affair with Julia could easily be construed as an abuse of power. The pieces were starting to fall into place in my mind. And if Greg loses his job, he can't afford to leave you for Julia. Exactly. And Julia would have to choose between a married man with no income and the stable life she's built with you. Valerie's smile was predatory. Of course, by then, you might not want her back. She was right about that. Even if Julia came crawling back, begging for forgiveness, I wasn't sure I could ever trust her again. The woman I'd married, the woman I'd built a life with, had been systematically lying to me for months. She'd looked me in the eye every morning and told me she loved me while planning her escape with another man. How did you come back from that? So we're really doing this? I asked. Unless you have a better idea. I thought about it for a moment, weighing my options. I could confront Julia directly, demand an explanation, try to work things out through counseling and therapy. I could pretend I'd never seen those emails and hope the affair burned itself out naturally. I could file for divorce and try to move on with my life. Or I could team up with the woman across from me and make sure that Julia and Greg paid a price for their betrayal. I'm in, I said. Valerie raised her coffee mug in a mock toast. To justice. To revenge, I corrected, and we clinked mugs like we were sealing a pact with the devil. Maybe we were. Over the next 2 weeks, Valerie and I became experts in surveillance and subterfuge. We met regularly at different coffee shops around the city, sharing intelligence like Cold War spies. She was methodical and ruthless. I was motivated by a burning sense of betrayal that grew stronger with each new piece of evidence we uncovered. The evidence was damning. Greg had charged over $3,000 in hotel rooms and restaurant bills to his company credit card in the past 3 months. Julia had been withdrawing cash from our joint account in small amounts, probably to avoid triggering my attention, but it added up to nearly $1,500 in unexplained expenses. Most damning of all were the photos. Valerie had hired a private investigator, a grizzled ex-cop named Tommy Ricci, who specialized in matrimonial cases. Tommy was expensive, but he was thorough. Within a week, he'd provided us with a portfolio of images that left no doubt about what our spouses were doing in their spare time. Julia and Greg entering the Copley Plaza Hotel at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. Julia and Greg sharing an intimate dinner at an expensive restaurant in the North End. Julia and Greg kissing in the parking garage of her office building, her hands tangled in his hair like she was drowning and he was oxygen. Looking at those photos was like being punched in the stomach repeatedly. This was my wife, the woman who'd promised to love and honor me, the mother of my child, wrapped around another man like he was the answer to every prayer she'd ever whispered. You okay? Valerie asked, noticing my expression as I flipped through Tommy's latest batch of surveillance photos. We were sitting in her BMW in the parking lot of a Starbucks in Cambridge, far enough from our respective neighborhoods to avoid being spotted by anyone we knew. It had become our regular meeting spot, neutral territory where we could plan our next moves without fear of discovery. "I keep thinking I should feel angrier," I said, setting the photos aside. "But mostly I just feel empty, like someone scooped out my insides and left me hollow." "The anger will come," Valerie assured me. "It's part of the process. First shock, then denial, then bargaining, then anger. You're right on schedule." "You sound like you speak from experience." "I told you, Greg's done this before. The first time I went through all the stages of grief in about 3 weeks. Cried, begged him to stop, promised to be a better wife, the whole pathetic routine." Her laugh was bitter. "The second time, I skipped straight to anger. The third time, I started planning." "How many times have there been?" 5 that I know of, probably more that I don't." She pulled out her phone and showed me a folder labeled Greg's Girls. It contained dozens of photos spanning several years. Greg with various women at restaurants, hotels, corporate events. "I've been documenting his infidelities for 2 years now, waiting for the right opportunity to use them." "Why didn't you just leave him?" "Because leaving would have meant giving up half of everything we'd built together, and Greg's very good at hiding assets. But if I can prove he's been using company resources to fund his affairs, I can get him fired for cause. No severance package, no stock options, no golden parachute. And if he's unemployed when we divorce, I get to keep everything." I was beginning to understand that Valerie Sloane was a far more dangerous adversary than her polished exterior suggested. She'd been playing a long game while Greg thought he was getting away with his infidelities, and now she was ready to collect on years of accumulated grievances. "What about Julia?" I asked. "What's your plan for her?" "That's really up to you. How far are you willing to go?" I thought about it. A month ago, I would have said I'd never want to hurt Julia, that I loved her too much to seek revenge, even if she betrayed me. But a month ago, I'd believed my wife was faithful and my marriage was solid. A month ago, I'd been a different person. "I want her to feel what I've felt," I said finally. The humiliation, the betrayal, the sense that everything she believed about her life was a lie. I want her to know what it's like to have the person you trust most in the world turn into a stranger. That can be arranged. Valerie's tone was so matter-of-fact that it sent a chill down my spine. "What do you have in mind?" "Julia works in HR, right? She's probably involved in hiring decisions, performance reviews, maybe even disciplinary actions. What do you think would happen if her coworkers found out she was sleeping with her boss?" "She'd be fired. At minimum. More likely, she'd be blacklisted from the entire industry. HR professionals are supposed to be above reproach, especially when it comes to workplace relationships. An affair with a superior would destroy her credibility permanently." The prospect of Julia losing her career should have bothered me more than it did. She'd worked hard to get where she was, climbing the corporate ladder through a combination of intelligence, determination, and genuine skill. But she'd also thrown away 18 years of marriage for a few months of excitement with a serial cheater. Actions had consequences. It was time she learned that. How do we expose them without implicating ourselves? Anonymous tip to the company's ethics hotline. Most corporations have them now, and they take reports of sexual harassment very seriously. We provide them with evidence of the affair and let the company's legal department do the rest. "What kind of evidence?" Valerie smiled and pulled out a manila envelope. "Tommy got these yesterday." The photos inside were more explicit than the previous batch. Greg and Julia in what was clearly a hotel room, partially undressed, caught in intimate poses that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. My stomach churned as I looked at them, but I forced myself to study each image carefully. "How did Tommy get these?" "Hotel security cameras have blind spots, but they don't cover everything. Tommy's been tracking their patterns for weeks. He knew which room they'd be in and when, and he positioned himself accordingly. Is this legal? Photographing people in a public hotel corridor? Absolutely. What they chose to do with the door open is their own business. I looked at the photos again, noticing details I'd missed the first time. Julia was wearing lingerie I'd never seen before. Expensive-looking stuff that definitely hadn't come from our joint checking account. Greg's wedding ring was visible on the nightstand, casually discarded like his marriage vows. When do we make our move? I asked. Soon. Greg's promotion decision is coming up next week. If we time this right, we can destroy his career prospects and their relationship in one coordinated strike. And then what? Then we watch them scramble to pick up the pieces while we move on with our lives. Valerie started her car, signaling that our meeting was over. Get some rest, Alex. Next week is going to be very interesting. As I drove home, I tried to imagine what my life would look like after we'd executed our plan. Julia would be unemployed and humiliated, her affair exposed to her colleagues and friends. Greg would lose his promotion and possibly his job, his marriage to Valerie over, his reputation in ruins. And I would be, what? Free? Vindicated? Or just as empty as I felt right now, with the added weight of having orchestrated someone else's destruction? I pulled into my driveway and sat in my car for a moment, looking at my house. Julia's car was there, which meant she was home for once. Through the living room window, I could see her and Emma watching TV together, probably some mindless sitcom or reality show. They looked like a normal mother and daughter spending a quiet evening at home. But nothing about our life was normal anymore. Julia was planning to leave me for another man. Emma was caught in the middle of a situation she didn't fully understand, and I was plotting revenge with the wife of my spouse's lover. When had my life become a soap opera? My phone buzzed with a text from Julia. Dinner's in the oven. Come inside before it gets cold. For a moment, I almost believed we could go back to the way things were. I could walk into that house, kiss my wife hello, ask Emma about her day, and pretend that everything was fine. We could eat dinner together like a family, watch TV, go to bed in the same room we'd shared for 18 years. But it would all be a lie. Julia would be thinking about Greg, counting down the days until she could leave me behind. Emma would be walking on eggshells, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. And I would be sitting there like a fool, pretending not to know that my marriage was already over. Instead, I texted back, "Working late. Don't wait up." Then I drove to Murphy's Pub, where Pete was waiting with a bottle of bourbon and a sympathetic ear. Some conversations were better had with a friend who knew all your secrets, especially when those secrets were about to explode into the open. The call came at 10:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was in my home office pretending to work on a technical manual for a software company while actually refreshing my email every 30 seconds, waiting for news. When my phone rang and Valerie's name appeared on the screen, my heart started racing. "It's done," she said without preamble. "Greg just got called into a meeting with HR and the senior partners. The ethics complaint was filed yesterday, and they've been reviewing the evidence all morning." I'd been expecting this moment for days, but hearing it actually happen felt surreal. "How do you know?" Greg's assistant called me. She thought I should know that he might be late for dinner because he was dealing with a serious work situation. Poor thing has no idea she's witnessing the end of his career. Through my office window, I could see Mrs. Patterson walking her dog, completely oblivious to the fact that 2 marriages were imploding less than 50 feet away. The normalcy of the scene felt obscene given what was happening. What about Julia? She should be getting called in any minute now. HR will want to interview both parties separately, and once they see the evidence Tommy provided, there won't be much room for denial. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Julia's name appeared on the screen, and I felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. "I should take this," I told Valerie. "Good luck. Call me later." I answered Julia's call on the fourth ring, trying to sound casual. Hey, what's up? Alex. Julia's voice was tight with panic. Something's happened at work. I need to come home. Are you okay? I can't talk about it over the phone. But I'm in trouble, Alex. Real trouble. The fear in her voice was genuine, and for a moment I felt a flicker of the old protectiveness that had defined our marriage for so many years. This was the woman I'd loved since college, the mother of my child, my partner in everything that mattered. But then I remembered the photos Tommy had taken, the emails I'd read, the months of lies and deception. Julia had made her choice when she decided to have an affair with her boss. Now she was facing the consequences. I'll be here, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Thank you. I love you, Alex. I know things have been distant between us lately, but I love you. You know that, right? I'll see you when you get home. I hung up without saying I loved her back because I wasn't sure I did anymore. Love required trust, and trust was something Julia had systematically destroyed over the past few months. She arrived home 20 minutes later, her face streaked with tears and her usually perfect hair disheveled. She looked like someone who'd just watched her life collapse in real time, which, I supposed, she had. They fired me, she said without preamble, collapsing onto the couch like her legs couldn't support her anymore. They fired me, Alex. After 8 years with the company, they escorted me out like a criminal. I sat down across from her, maintaining some distance. What happened? Someone filed a complaint about me, an ethics violation. They said I was having an inappropriate relationship with a superior. Julia's voice cracked on the last word. They had photos, Alex. Horrible, invasive photos that made it look like what? Like I was having an affair. The lie came so easily that I almost admired her commitment to the deception. Even now, with her career in ruins and the evidence undeniable, she was still trying to maintain her innocence. Were you? I asked quietly. Julia's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked genuinely shocked by the question. How can you ask me that? I'm your wife. I would never… Julia! I pulled out my phone and showed her one of the photos Tommy had taken. I know about Greg. The color drained from her face as she stared at the image on my screen. It was one of the tamer ones, but it clearly showed her and Greg in an intimate embrace outside the Copley Plaza Hotel. There was no way to explain it away as innocent. Where did you get this? She whispered. Does it matter? Alex, I can explain. It's not what it looks like. Really? Because it looks like you're kissing another man. It looks like you're having an affair with your boss and using company resources to fund your relationship. It looks like you've been lying to me for months while planning to leave me for him. Julia's composure finally cracked completely. She buried her face in her hands and started sobbing, her whole body shaking with the force of her grief. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to hold her while she cried and tell her everything would be okay. But a larger part of me felt nothing but cold satisfaction. This was what she deserved. This was what happened when you betrayed the people who loved you. How long have you known? She asked through her tears. Long enough. Are you going to leave me? The question hung in the air between us like smoke. A month ago, the answer would have been an automatic no. Julia was my wife, the love of my life, the woman I'd promised to stand by through sickness and health, for better or worse. But that was before I'd learned that she'd been planning to leave me, before I'd seen her in another man's arms, before I'd realized that our entire marriage had become a performance for her benefit. I don't know, I said honestly. Please, Alex. I know I made mistakes, but we can work through this. We can go to counseling. We can figure this out. I don't want to lose you. What about Greg? Julia flinched like I'd slapped her. It's over. They fired him too. His wife is filing for divorce. Everything's falling apart. Good. The anger in my voice shocked both of us. Julia finally realized I was the one who'd reported her and Greg, and she tried to flip it, said I'd chosen to destroy her career instead of fighting for our marriage. I reminded her she'd already destroyed our family the moment she started sneaking around with a married man. Then Emma came home. At 16, she read the room in a second and asked if we were getting divorced. I told her the truth. We didn't know yet. She just nodded and went to her room. Kids always know when something is broken. After she left, my phone rang. It was Valerie, Greg's wife, calm and cold. Greg was hiding in his study. She was filing for divorce in the morning and going after everything: house, cars, investments. When I hung up and said her name, Julia finally understood. I hadn't just reacted. I'd teamed up with Greg's wife, gathered proof, filed the ethics complaint, and let them both fall on their own swords. "You planned this," she whispered, horrified. For 18 years, I'd been the safe, predictable husband who fixed things quietly. I had never been ruthless, until she made me learn how. Julia stared at me and said she didn't know who I was anymore. I told her I felt exactly the same.